Welcome everybody, collaborators, colleagues, students and others who are joining us for the presentation of the database that is one of the results of the research project Opere buffa as a European phenomenon, migration, mapping and transformation of a new genre. This project was situated from 2017 to 2020 at the University of Bayreuth, and it was financed by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. My name is Kordula Knaus. I was the principal investigator of the project, and I carried it out together with my colleagues Andrea Zedler and Lena van der Hoven. And you've already seen the sign that this presentation is being recorded, so this is a reminder also for that. We will record the presentation, but not the discussion afterwards. So please feel free to ask all the questions you want without being embarrassed afterwards in the recording that will be online somewhere. So the idea for this project came up when I was in Bologna a couple of years ago, doing a project on the comic operas of Baldassare Galuppi, and I realized how fascinating and also complicated the dissemination, adaptation and transformation processes of Galuppi's operas in Europe were. And I'm happy to welcome also some colleagues from Bologna today, Lorenzo Bianconi, Marco Bighelli, and also Nicola Usula, so welcome. So while I was working on Galuppi, I decided to make this into a larger project that should also include a database collecting data about opera buffa performances in Europe. So in this project, we collaborated with several departments and institutions for our database with the chair of applied computer science at the University of Bayreuth, Professor Stefan Jablonski, and the database was programmed by Klaus Freiberger, who is also here with us, and will later on talk about the technical aspects of the database. Professor Tom Brökel, Professor for Regional Innovation at the University of Stavanger in Norway, participated in the project with network analyses, and also he will later on give some insight into his work. The data from the database is also integrated into the Musikon performance database located at the SLUB Dresden. And here we cooperated with Sabine Koch, who is also here with us today. The project was also supported by a fruitful exchange with many other projects with similar topics. For example, the project Opera buffa in Wien with the principal investigator Michele Calella, the project Pasticcio, Ways of Arranging Attractive Operas with the PI Gesa Toniden and Aneta Markuszewska, the project about the music library of Maximilian Franz with the PI Birgit Lodes, the project Cultural Transfer of Music in Vienna with Martin Eibel, and the project Operesti as a Cultural Network with the principal investigator Daniel Brandenburg. So we are extremely grateful for these collaborations and exchanges. And many other colleagues have supported our project. And at this point, I hand over to Andrea.
Thank you, Kordula. I will share my slides. Okay. Like the buffa singers in the 18th century, we too, of course, are part of a network of colleagues to whom we owe special thanks today. They and many others, especially archivists and librarians, have contributed in one or more ways to our Opera buffa project. In accordance with our database, I will map our thank you and would like to start by thanking Giuseppina Racci. Okay. She helped us in the tricky pandemic periods to gain information about the first reconstructible non-Italian performance series in Lisbon. I'm referring, of course, to Gaetano Latilla's Madame Marciana, performed in 1740 at the Court Theatre under João V. I jumped to Trieste. Information on the cast of the Galuppi operas performed in the Adriatic city kindly was provided by Maria Luisi. With regard to the important groups of the Mingotti brothers, we exchanged information with Rainer Theobald, here especially on the Münster libretti, and also with Manuel Berwald and Metoda Kokola. The last two provided information on the performance series in Leipzig, Graz, and Ljubljana. Tatiana Korneva, now in Venice, not only invited us to her essential conference in Berlin, She helped us with libretti from St. Petersburg and Moscow, as did Anna Bakitna, with whom I had a longer exchange about the performance of impresario Carlo Tomatis in Warsaw. Milada Jonasova and Mark Niobo provided us with information about the special performance situation in Prague. The Kärntner Theater in Vienna is a special concern of Andrea Sommer-Mattis. She not only gave insight into her intensive work on the theatre, but also helped us with source material. I had the opportunity to talk intensively with Miriam Bayer about the networks of singers and the world of the so-called operisti in general. I would like to thank her most sincerely for our exchange of ideas. And we have to thank Daniel Brandenburg as well for a letter from the hand of Angelo Mingotti. Regarding Mingotti's impresario colleague Giovanni Francesco Crosa, I was allowed to delve deeper into the specific performance situation in London thanks to Cheryl Duncan's recent research. From the beginning of the project, Gesa Zoniden has repeatedly pointed out the problems of the GND, the Integrated Authority File. Together with her, we discussed the central problems affecting our databases at the GND convention in 2018. Thanks to Klaus Beachman, we were able to discuss the problem of the work level, which is just as important for us, for our project, at the RISM conference 2019 in Mainz. Finally, yet importantly, I had the chance to talk over buffer-related problem areas with Martin Eibel during some tours in the mountains of Lower Austria. Many thanks to all of you for the numerous suggestions and assistance. And now I hand over to Kordula again.
Thank you, Andrea, for this wonderful map. So now before we explain the database and its features, a few words about the general aims of the project. The main objective was to systematically explore the dissemination of opera buffa in Europe from 1740 to 1765. Full-length 3-act comic opera was first established in Naples in the early 18th century and was adapted in the late 1930s and 1730s and 1740s in North Italy. From there, it migrated and quickly became a European phenomenon in the 1750s and 1760s. It was performed in St. Petersburg, just as in Vienna, Copenhagen, London, or Barcelona. In the project, we investigated processes of dissemination and transformation of the genre from different angles. The underlying concepts were oriented on key terms such as migration and mobility, mapping and networks, transformation and transfer. Based on the collected data of the database, Andrea Zedler conducted many quantitative analyses to find out when opera buffa arrived where, what were the centers of opera buffa production at which time, which troops were significant for its dissemination, and which works and composers were the most often performed. Another question concerned the people involved in the production process, the so-called operisti and their networks. Who were the most important impresari involved in the dissemination, the most active singers, and how were they connected to each other? An important issue here was the investigation of mobile opera troupes. How did they establish their engagements? Which aspects of their engagements were specified in contracts with city officials? How stable were the troupes? And how did impresari finance their opera buffa adventures in Europe? In addition to the mobility phenomena of persons and troops, we also investigated those of materials, particularly scores. How did they arrive at the performance places? Where were they copied? And who was responsible for the transfer of the manuscripts? And this brings us to the question of performance versions. On its travels through Europe, opera buffa significantly changed, these changes being reactions to particular available casts and their abilities, particular circumstances, particular wishes from those in power, etc. So the project team analyzed these changes both on the level of a singular work as well as from the perspective of specific places. But not only is opera buffa subject of transformation, opera buffa also significantly transforms the operatic landscape from mid-18th century onwards. This concerns, for example, the question of the ensemble structure. the relation between opera buffa and opera seria, and what genre could be performed with which cast. Finally, the project dealt with the establishment of opera buffa in European courts. This project part, mainly carried out by Lena van der Hoven, examined opera buffa in relation to courtly representation and the aesthetically and socially substantiated changes in taste that were influenced particularly by the establishment of opera buffa. Hereby, the project not only contributes to a better understanding of 18th century court culture, but also gives new insights into the changing aesthetic values in the time of Enlightenment. So a lot of questions and all the answers to these questions you will find in a book that we will also publish and which will have all the results of the project in it. And now I hand over to Andrea, who will now introduce the database and its features.
Yes, thank you again. I start presentation. I will start with my presentation with some words and aims and structure of the database. This database has been designed to give access to records which document the early phase of non-Italian performances of opera buffa between 1740 and 1765. In order to structure the datasets, information on performance dates, places, and names of contributors were assigned to so-called performance series. The term performance series is understood as a run of performances of one opera buffa at a certain venue outside of Italy. All entries have been assigned specific identifiers within the project, which can be retrieved in the database. We have divided the database into 7 sections, and I would like to start with the first. The Opere Buffa button brings up a list of 94 titles. All Italian premieres of operas later performed outside of Italy are gathered here and can be arranged alphabetically or chronologically. Furthermore, it can be sorted according to performance, places, composers, or librettists. On the right-hand side, you can find the identifier and 3 navigation options. The arrow leads to the detail view from the selected opera. Each detail view is identified with a permanent link that can be copied below the button. I have chosen L'Orazio, a commedia per musica that premiered 1737 in Naples. In this detail view, you will find information on the performance place, the cast, the performance dates, the libretto, and other source material, as well as related projects like Corago. Jumping back to the Opere Buffa section, the next button in the navigation bar leads to all performance series of selected opera outside of Italy. Here you can see the list of performances of L'Orazio from 1745 onwards. And finally, you can select the map view and will get an overview of the performance venues located on the European map. The events pattern leads to a chronological list of 501 series of opera buffa performed outside of Italy. For a structured overview, the lists are divided into 5 year sections. A navigation option to the detail view on the right-hand side can be found here as well. You can also call up the desired performance series via direct access using the identifier number. The alphabetically assorted section contributors attempts to provide information on singers, dancers, and so on. All places where one person has been involved in a performance series can be visualized directly via the map button. The detail view gives a standard name and all name variants of the person, especially of the singers, the gender, a G&D reference, and if available, the membership to an opera troupe. In the list of functions, details on the participation, like the name of the role within the performance series, are given. I can skip the next section named Networks, as Tom Brökel will provide more detailed information on it, and jump to the section maps. The entry page for maps visualizes all locations where performance series took place between 1737, our earliest datable premiere, and 1765 on a European map. Gray dots refer to premieres, green to performance series outside of Italy. The map section is divided into 3 subsections. This enables the visualization of venues of Opera buffa performances that are linked to titles of premieres, contributors, and opera companies. To narrow the results further, year boundaries can be set on a sliding bar. A click on a dot in the map leads to more information on the selected performance series. The search interface is divided into 2 parts. The first part allows searching within the database with combinable filters. When you enter a term in the form, an automatic suggestion is created. A list of performance series is provided under the filter section. The respective detail view of every entry of the result list leads to the section events. There are several aspects that should be noted in addition to the otherwise freely combinable filter options. There's a special feature to note for the filter title. Since title changes were frequent for opera buffa performances outside of Italy, all title variants of an opera title are given in order to generate a complete list of series connected to the premiere of the selected opera. If you find Impresario Abbandonato, it will be linked to L'Orazio, its premiere. Concerning the filter contributor, name variants of the surnames are taken into account and can be searched for. For example, the entry Ottini finds the singer with the standard name Vincenzo Uttini. Role names can only be selected when a person or a function search is carried out. The second part of the search allows you to retrieve lists of all entries recorded in the database, sorted according to contributors, troops, places, and theaters. Beyond that, the contributor by function section allows to be filtered by years. I have singled out here the dancers that contributed to opera buffa performances between 1750 and 1751. Finally, a few words on the data format. Recording the dates of opera performances as precisely as possible was an important but also challenging concern within the project, since sources like libretti usually only speak of an opera season that is not defined any further in terms of dates. However, in order to trace the intensity of performances, at least selectively, an attempt was made to determine performance dates and to record them according to the Gregorian calendar in a detailed view of the section events. In order to be able to visualize the Europe-wide dissemination of opera buffa and the associated personnel with the help of the database, geodata on the individual venues was collected. Locations are recorded based on the GeoNames project with, of course, coordinates. From 1740 onwards, opera buffa were usually performed outside of Italy by and under the responsibility of course, Italians. In order to visualize the venues at which a person or a troupe performed at, it was necessary to identify the person as well as to standardize their respective names for the database entry. The names mentioned in sources are by no means uniform. In parts, spelling variations can be discerned, and stage or artist names like La Stella for Giovanni Locatelli are also used in the sources. In order to reconcile the different spellings, a record with a standard name was established for each person. To determine the standard names, it was first checked whether GND IDs were available. This, however, is only the case for about 12% of the recorded individuals. Therefore, further sources had to be taken into account for the selection of the standard names. Claudio Sartori's catalogs were, of course, of outstanding importance for our project. I do not want to delve deeper into this now. We have explained the naming conventions and our decisions concerning work and source data in more detail in the section about the database. To summarize, we have recorded a total of 595 performance series in this database, plus over 1,000 performance dates. We have gathered dates on 52 opera troupes and just about 1,300 contributors. We are finally pleased that this data that we can present via our database will also be mapped in the Music and Performance project so that our data will be even more widely accessible. And now I want to hand over to Klaus Freiberger, who will give insight into our technical details of the database. Thank you.
So for the technical details, we decided to store the data in a relational database. This is the standard way to go. And one advantage of a relational database is that the informations are stored in a set of tables, and each entry in this table has a unique ID. This is, for example, the ID you saw at the Lauratio premiere, where you have a specific number like 1 or 1004 for all the different entries. So you can easily access them, and you have a way to filter all the entries in the database according to some properties. To transfer the data from the relational database to the website, we need a backend. This is written in Java, and our website is built up with an Angular framework. This is usually an easy way to develop a database application. An interesting aspect is the geo-visualization. Therefore, we used ArcGIS. This provides a simple way to bring the geodata, which is also stored in our relational database, to our website, where we can easily put our cities with the coordinates into the map, and then we can choose a specific way how to represent the data. In our case, it was important that the map has no borders, because the current borders would be misleading because they do not represent the actual borders that were present at the time where the opera happened. The important part in a database application is the database schema. Here you can see the whole schema. Of course, you cannot read anything because it's too big, but I just wanted to show how it looks. The important thing is that you have to develop the schema with respect to all the details that could be inside the data. So you have to really combine the knowledge from the domain experts and the database experts to really capture all the details inside your schema, so you can be able to display them at the end in the website. Just to zoom into the schema and see some of these details. On the left side, we have the persons connected to the dates with respect to the job they did on the specific date. So theoretically, it's possible that each person does a specific job on a specific date. So you have a really fine granularity to combine the persons with the dates from a series. On the right-hand side, you can see that one person doesn't have just one name. It's more that each person can have several names, and they are correct from a specific time. So, for example, for 5 years, he was called Federico, and then after that, he calls himself just Rico, or something like that is possible with this modeling. And the last aspect is that each series either has a premiere or is connected to a premiere. So you have all these events and series connected together. That's it from my side. And if you have questions later to this technical aspects, feel free to ask them in the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Klaus, for giving this insights. And Tom Brökel will now tell us more about the network analysis.
Yeah, thank you very much and welcome from my side as well. Let me quickly switch to the slides view. So the good news is I really had a lot of fun being involved in this project. And as you've heard in the introduction, I have a totally different background. But anyway, I was in the pleasurable situation of being allowed to work with this database, which has a lot to offer, right? It has information about singers, as you've just heard, locations, the type of troops, play series, and where everything took place at what moment in time. So that is already a fantastic information, but it is really just the surface of this data. And when I came into the project, Kordula and others, they already had this idea. There's more to it, and she mentioned it also in the introduction. There is most likely a very interesting relational dimension, and that is particularly something I looked at, and that is the relational dimension is represented basically by the idea that, for instance, singers in these opera buffas, they are jointly participating in certain events. Usually, and this is how we defined it then in the data, these events imply that two of them, for instance, participated in one play, in 1 year, in one particular location. So that means most likely, at least from what we know from the data, most likely these have met. So they have maybe even acted together or sang together in this performance. And this implies that there's a relation between the two. What do I mean by that? So let's think about, we have an event A. So that would be one performance in one particular year in one location. So then we have another event of a similar sort, which, for instance, could be the same play, but in a different location. For this, we know that, for instance, singer 1 has been participating in event B, singer 2 in, the order of the arrows are not perfect here, but you get the idea. So basically, that is, we know which of the singers have participated in what type of event. And we know this event represents a possibility to interact and share knowledge. I'll talk about that one in a second. So this relational structure is what is contained in this Opera buffer database. And that was something I was really interested in looking at, and inspired, of course, by the wonderful colleagues who told me, hey, take a look at that, maybe there's something. So the idea again is that if singers or if participants jointly worked in one place, they are more likely to have interacted. So they may have learned something from each other. And of course, this is what this research showed, that they do take over ideas from others. They get some insights into how to interpret certain things, and so on and so forth. So they do exchange ideas, maybe even travel plans. We don't really know about that, but at least ideas, impressions, they copied each other, and so on. So everything that relates to a kind of knowledge exchange perspective. They may even have or started to organize future events during those events. Most importantly, and this is what this project shows, is of course, how did the opera buffa, or the knowledge thereof, diffused in space and time across Europe. So the idea that two singers interact in this event, interact with each other, learn from each other, inspire each other, and so on, is at the core of the network perspective. Because if you take the structure I've shown before, so relations between individual singers participating, or better, jointly participating in a specific event, a particular performance in a certain place and time, you can transform this one into something that looks like this. So you have seen networks before. So basically each of these nodes, these small green individuals or pictures, pictograms of individuals, represents a singer. And if two singers are connected by one of those lines, one of those networks links, it means they have jointly participated in a specific event at a certain place and time and so on. And of course, then we know a lot about these things. So for instance, we know who else was part of the same event. With whom did they interact in another event later on in subsequent years? So these relations in these networks are actually dynamic over time. They change between the years. And that is, for instance, you indicated by the colors in the network. So we take this very, it's called a do mode network structure on the left-hand side and transform it into these wonderful networks. And what can we do with that one? Well, we can ask and answer a lot of interesting questions. So for instance, who has had the biggest influence or has been influenced the most at a certain point in time or in general? So who has interacted with the most number of people, for instance? But also you can ask, who is really important for this entire structure of the network? Who's holding it together? Who is most likely a person that has learned the most and also diffused the most in terms of knowledge concerning the opera? And you can then even ask from a more structural perspective, has the structure of the network changed over time? What do I mean by that? For instance, a network might be very much geared or centered on an individual person. Right? If you think about a star, for instance, you have one person and everybody is related to that one. While in other contexts, you may have networks where everybody is connected to everybody and so on. So you can ask a lot of these structural questions. Here, I think one of the interesting findings, for instance, is that Marianne de Grandes Catani, sorry, my Italian is terrible, has been one of the central features keeping the community together from a network perspective, right? So that's something we can dig into further if we want to. And the good news is that all this is, of course, dynamic. So we know this for individual years, and we can track over time who has been this type of integrative person, this type of connector between the different interpretations of this opera within this community. And you can generate, for instance, these beautiful bar races if you want to, which are quite informative, I would say, if you know more about the content here. Before I stop, I would like to show you one more thing, and that's something I'm pretty certain you will enjoy as well. And that is, we've created also interactive versions of these networks, meaning that you can play around with this type of data. So on the website, you have a picture like this, which looks very much the same as what I've just shown in the presentation. But here it is interactive in the sense of that you can zoom in. So if you want to see certain parts of the network more closely, you can also click on individuals and you get information about the name and the number of series he or she has been active in, and you can drag that person around and simply get a better look into what this network actually has been like at a certain moment in time, for instance, or which person. You can also choose individuals. If you're interested in the role that Anna Bonn played, then unfortunately that's not a good example because that person was not that active, at least in the network, but you spot it in the network and see whether she has been rather central for the network, being integral to the diffusion of the opera buffa from a network perspective again, or whether she has been rather in the periphery. So these interactive versions are also available. Again, sorry, it took a while. The color of the links represents the different years a connection has been established. And that was all but a very, very quick preview, or sneak preview, I better say, from my side. And thank you very much. If there are questions, I will be available later on as well. I hand over.
Thank you very much. After all this general information, you may ask yourself how you would actually use the database as a first-time user. I would like to give you a short hand-on demonstration of how to use the database without going into detail in regards to the context. I'm especially interested in the opera buffa repertoire performances in the context of chords. Manuel Berwert has pointed out that Locatelli had staged Galoppis in Mondo alla Roversa not only in May 1755 in Leipzig in the presence of the Saxon Elector Frederick August, but that Locatelli then interrupted his 4 months playing time in Dresden to travel to Prague and perform opera there, while the Empress and Emperor of Austria were in Prague. I chose this performance as it had a special occasion and it is a good demonstration on how to use different search tools. I would like to demonstrate how the database can help to learn, on one hand, more about the performance itself, and on the other hand, to learn more about a broader context. I know that we have some experts on Prague in the audience today, who hopefully excuse that we will only touch upon the topic briefly and concentrate on handling of the database. For a first visual overview, I'm interested where Il Mondo alla Rovescia was performed until 1765. Therefore, I start by clicking on Maps in the top row and select underneath on the left-hand side the section Visualize Opera Buffa. After selecting Il Mondo alla Rovescia in the open field, all performance places of the opera can be visualized. By clicking on the different dots, I receive information of the year and performance place. The map reveals quickly that this opera traveled well. Its furthest performance place was Moscow. One can also instantly see that it remained on the mainland and was, for example, not performed in London. To get more details, I go back to the top row and select Search. Now I have different options to find the performance I have chosen. I can enter all the information I already have into our different search filters, such as title, performance place, theatre and year, or only parts of them. If I only search with the filter of the title, I receive 16 results as at different performance locations and in different years. It is a great tool to quickly receive a valuable overview where the opera was performed under this title. First listed in the chart is the premiere in Venice in the year 1750. The chart reveals that the first two performances outside of Italy happened only 2 years later in Barcelona and Brunswick. Furthermore, I receive an overview that this opera was performed in 1755 at 6 different performance places, varying from locations in a courtly context to those outside of the court. If I add the information in the search filter contributor that Giovanni Battista Locatelli was the impresario, I learned that in 1754, he performed this opera in a court context in Prague, in a kind of semi-courtly context in Leipzig and in Dresden, but also in Hamburg. This knowledge might lead to diverse research questions, asking, for example, if adjustments were made for different performance places and audiences. Questions about adjustment will be addressed in more detail in our upcoming publication of the project. Before I will follow up on this question in our example, I would like to give a last example for the different search options. When I only search for Prague in the filter of performance places, I receive 37 results. But when I chose Court Theatre in the filter Theatre, I only receive a single result. Il Mondo alla Rovescia receives thereby a special position, which can be explained by the fact that the Empress and the Emperor are being in Prague at the time. From the diary of Johann Joseph Kievan Müller-Metsch, we know that they were in the audience. Mentioned as Regio Teatro in the libretto, we guessed that the performance place was a temporary performance place, which gave tribute to the special occasion. To learn now more about the performance itself, I click on the arrow on the right. On the top of the No Opening page, I can get more information on the premiere, the performance place, and the troupe, which performed the opera in 1754 in Prague, Court Theatre. Underneath, I can find a section with contributors. Let's have a look at the section of singers. In this case, we were able to trace the names of the singers and in which role they performed. With the arrow at the far right of each name, I have the opportunity to find more detailed information about the individual singer, if available. Underneath is a section Dates. Here I can find information about the date of the performance or performance, if this information was traceable. In this case, we don't know for sure the exact date of the performance, but only the season during which it was performed. At the bottom of the page, underneath the section Dates, I'm provided with a link to the libretto, as well as information to related projects, in which I can receive more details. In this case, we can see a link to Corrado, and Manu Berwald's dissertation, Italienische Oper in Leipzig, is mentioned as a secondary source. With the link to the libretto, I could now analyze the libretto and compare it with the libretti from other performances to approach a beforehand formulated research interest if there might have been adjustments in performances for different performance contexts in and outside of the court. Being interested in the context of the premiere, I go back to the top of the page and click on the first button. The new page now reveals information on the performance in Venice in 1750. The premiere had been only 4 years earlier in Venice. This knowledge could be of interest, for example, when being interested in how common or dominant Venetian repertoire was at European courts during our research period. But for now, let us have a closer look at the list of singers in the section Contributors. The list reveals, with Anastasio Massa, that Locatelli's ensemble in Prague had one singer in the performance who had already been part of the premiere in Venice, and who might have passed on information from that premiere to the performance in Prague. The formation of troops and what repertoire they performed is an important part of our forthcoming book. As Anastasio Massa now caught my interest, I want to know more about him as an individual singer, so I can click on the arrow behind his name. Have I been one too late all the time? This now opening page shows me that we are not aware of a name variant for the singer. This is important knowledge for reading and analyzing our sources. In the section Troops, I learned that he was not only part of Locatelli's troupe, but also of 3 more troops. Underneath that section, a chart shows me at which places he performed opera buffe, in which year and with which troupe. The arrow on the right gives me the opportunity to receive more information on all of them if something catches my interest. I said that I'm interested in possible changes in performances in and outside of a courtly context. I need to be aware that changes in the performance, like changes of arias, might reflect a change of the performance place, but they might also be a result of a change in the troupe formation. Therefore, it is interesting to take a look at Locatelli's troupe. Clicking on the troupe, I can not only see who was in the troupe from which year to which year, but also in which operas they performed during the given time period. We can already in 1755 see first changes in the cast of In Mondo alla Roversa. Changes in the cast can be seen even better for the performance in Moscow in 1759. I do not want to overwhelm you with too many slides and screenshots, and we want to have enough time to discuss questions with you. So I'm ending at this point, though we only slightly touched upon possible ways to work with the database. We hope that a small introduction will tempt you to explore the database with time on your own. We are aware that we might have missed details, mentions, or secondary sources. So we want to kindly invite you to write to us when you have something to add. In contrast to print media, the advantage of this database is that it can be always easily updated. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you all the others for their contributions. And we now stop the recording.